morning, everybody. We are back to work on our packet, which is the chapter 12, looking at different sets of data. And I'm going to pick up and continue reading on the section that is about population. So, if everybody would get with me on page 274, that is where we will be. Population. Economists also look at data sets describing a country's population. For example, what is the total population of a country? And currently, um, we are working on a census, which I have not yet filled out my paperwork, but the census gives an idea of the population in our country. And everybody needs to fill them out because that also tells how much federal funding can go to a state, which is part of our economy, and how many people we have across the United States. So it's called a census. And I imagine that all of your parents did receive a census in the mail just as I did. And I keep getting reminders to fill those out. The next one is, what is age distribution of its population? What is the average birth rate? And then it gives you a definition: people born in a year per 1,000 people. Then it says, what is the average mortality rate? Again, a definition: how many people die in a year per 1,000 people. What is the average life expectancy? Definition: years of an average person's life. What is the literacy rate? Again, definition: what percentage of the population can read and write? So when they talk about whether somebody's literate or not literate, they're talking about whether they can read or write. A literacy rate is how many people in that country can read or write. All right, we are now on page 275, and I will show you that page in the camera. I guess it's not coming out very good. And that is the answer to that question um, at the bottom there, and we'll talk about that. So, uh, the economy. Finally, economists look at data sets concerning a country's population, how many goods and services it generally produces. These indicators also help measure a country's level of economic development. A country's gross domestic product, the GDP, is the total value of all goods and services produced by people from that country in a single year. All goods and services are produced by people. Whether they're on machines or not on machines, they are produced by people. Someone has to be there to run those machines. So, therefore, all goods and services that are produced by people in a single year is the entire country's GDP. However, we also have something called GDP per capita. A country's GDP per capita is the country's gross domestic product divided by its population. So they take that big number, and then they take the number of people that live in the country and they divide it by the number of people that live in the country. What that gives them is, it tells us the value of the production of an average person in that country in a single year. It also tells us the average income of a person. In the United States, last time I checked, it was about $55,000 per person in the United States. So, uh, what they're basically saying is that the average income into someone's home is about $55,000 a year. Okay, countries with a high GDP. Oh, I skipped a sentence there, guys. Going back, um, it it thus reflects the country's average standard of living. The higher the individual income, the higher the standard of living. It means they can afford to go on vacations, they can afford a home, they can afford cars, they can afford different things, making their standard of living more convenient, making it a higher standard of living. The lower that GDP per capita is, the lower the standard of living. Countries with a high GDP per capita have more highly developed economies. Their populations are more educated, have better health care, and live longer. Other economic data sets include the percentage of a country's workforce involved in agriculture or manufacturing, the types of crops grown, the number of farmers involved in subsistence farming. The definition to subsistence farming is growing just enough to meet an immediate family's needs with little or no surplus to sell on the outside market. And let's remember, the word agriculture is also interchangeable with the word farming. So um, you can use either one of those words. You can use farming or you can use agricultural. Economists often compare different data sets and draw conclusions. Look at the data sets below, and we have key data sets for select countries 2011 to 2012. In the first column, we have the country. Uh, we have Egypt, Honduras, Jordan, and Sweden. Then we have their per capita income. Remember, this is what they make per year. So the people in Egypt, their annual yearly income is only $6,723. You compare that to the United States, it's $55,000. So moving on, their average life expectancy in Egypt is 74 years. Their literacy rate is 72%. Honduras, their GDP per capita is 4,194. Their average life expectancy is 71 years. Their literacy rate is 80%. Jordan is $6,148 per year. Their average life expectancy is 80 years, and their literacy rate is 93%. You can see that a couple of those countries, even though their GDP per capita is lower, their value on education and having people that can read and write is important to them. And then finally, we have Sweden, $42,217 per year. The average life expectancy is 81 years, and 99% of their population can read and write. Their literacy rate is very high. What conclusions can you draw from these data sets? For example, do you see a relationship between GDP per capita and literacy rate? Write your answer in the space provided. There are three different scenarios or possible answers for this. And again, I had you guys do this in the Google Classroom. And so if you haven't done that assignment yet, you really need to go back to the Google Classroom and make sure that you do get that assignment done. One conclusion you could draw from this information is that a high literacy rate is associated with a high GDP. So there's my answer. Now here's my explanation. Sweden has the highest GDP in the table and the highest literacy rate. So an answer was given, and then details or evidence was given to why that answer is true. Another conclusion is that a high GDP is associated with a long life expectancy. So you're giving an answer saying that a high GDP is associated with a long life expectancy. And then an example is Honduras has the lowest GDP and the shortest life expectancy. So that's your evidence to back up your answer. And then finally, we can say that from the set of data, Sweden is well developed since it has a much higher GDP per capita than the other countries. So we're saying that they are well developed, and the reason why, the evidence why, is they have a much higher GDP per capita than any of the other countries. So that's how you would answer that question. Okay, in the Google Classroom, I had you do this page. And the directions on this page, which is 276, directions. Which term or phrase does not belong with the other terms and phrases in the same box? In the space to the right of each box, identify the term or phrase that does not fit. Then use the term in a sentence. Our first group is high-tech exports, trade, imports, literacy rate, and exports. There's only one term that does not go along with trade and imports and exports, and that term is literacy rate. So a sentence that we could use is all the other terms deal with imports and exports. A country's literacy rate means that the percentage of people in the country can read and write. Let me read that again. A country's literacy rate measures the percentage of people in a country who can read and write. So that's why that term does not belong there. Our next set is life expectancy, birth rate, mineral resources, mortality rate, and population. The only one that does not belong there is mineral resources. That's one of our natural resources. Mineral resources does not belong. All the other terms deal with measuring a country's demographic characteristics. Mineral resources are part of a country's material resources and are an important component of its ability to produce goods. Then our last box is gross domestic product, GDP, oil reserves, percentage of farmers in agriculture, and productivity. The only one there that does not belong is oil reserves. All the other terms deal with a country's level of development and economic productivity. Oil reserves refer to the amount of oil that you can bring from the ground. And then again, that's a natural resource. That goes back to what do we have as natural resources that helps us to produce goods and services. So those were the answers to page 276. Again, if you have not done that page yet, you need to backtrack, go back, get it done, and get it turned in. Submit it through the Google Classroom, please. It's easy to grade that way. I can put comments on it. I can return it to you. So please, I'm asking you to submit all of your assignments through the Google Classroom that I set up for you. All right, I will be back tomorrow with another video on the answers to the final page, which is also currently in the Google Classroom that you need to complete, and we'll read and discuss bar graphs tomorrow. Have a good day, you guys. Hope this video wasn't too long and boring. And again, I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.